Hi, my name's Jackie, and I'm the MakerSpace manager at Swarthmore College. Today we're going to get an introduction on Fusion 360 software, which is a 3D modeling software by 3D modeling this 3D printed ring that contains a bezel so that we can add a rhinestone. So I have my Fusion 360 software open, and Fusion 360 is a cloud-based software. So you do have to download it. It is free for hobbyists, and you can get educational access through your Swarthmore email account. So you can see that I have a profile in here, and every time I open the software, I have to log into my profile, and then all of the files that I create are stored on the cloud, but I can download them when I need to. So if you don't see that column to the left, you can come up here to this data panel and just click that, and then your folders will be available with your artwork in it, and you can create different folders for different applications, like this body art workshop where I have my files saved. So today we are going to be working on this ring, and I'm just going to navigate through the software a little bit to show you guys. Down on the bottom here, you can see an entire timeline appears that shows the history of what I've created here. And so you'll see that kind of build as you go throughout the software. And I can come down here in the timeline at any point and edit what I've done. So it's going to take me back into the timeline, and once I finish that, any changes that I make will update in the object. Now, that can cause some issues sometimes if you get far enough along in the software, but it is very convenient if you need to go back and make a minor change. So in order to zoom in and out, I have my mouse that has my right click, left click, and scroll button. And if I'm scrolling in the middle button, I can zoom in and out. If I press down on that same button, I can slide this all around here. If I hold down my shift key and press that same button, you see that I can rotate my object. There's also a view cube up here that has different sides to it, so I can click on these different sides. I can grab this cube by left clicking and rotating this around. If I want to see the top view, I can just click that and it will snap to that top view. Now, if I get too far gone, like say my model is out of view and I'm not sure where things are, I can get back to my home by clicking home here, and that will kind of reset me to this 3/4 view. So I want to come over to the left hand column here, and this is going to be where you are organizing your components and bodies. So at the top here we have basically sort of the top tier of our model that everything else is kind of organized under. So below that we can open up our document settings, and we can change our units by clicking on this little icon to the right, and we can work in centimeters, millimeters, inches, feet, and so forth. And so that's really good if you work better in inches, for example. And actually for 3D printing, the 3D printers run off of millimeters. So if you do need to work in inches, just as an easier reference for yourself, don't forget to change the document to millimeters if you intend on exporting it as an STL file and then 3D printing it. Below that we have sketches, and then under here we have two bodies. And we didn't create components for this, but I will show you how to do that. So what the difference is between a component and a body is that a component is basically kind of like a folder. So you can have multiple bodies under a component, but if you have a single body that you can click on, and you can edit those things. So we'll get into that a little bit more as we create our software. So if I want to create a new file, I can come up here and click this little plus button, and that will open up an untitled document. Once I go to save it, I'm actually going to save this before I start, and I'm going to call this ring prototype 4. Okay, so now I can see my title under here, and that has told the cloud that I'm creating a new file. Now there are different workspaces in Fusion 360. The space that it brings you into automatically is the parametric modeling space. So what that means is if I come up to create a shape, let's say I want to make a box, I have to select a plane that I'm going to create that box from. And so let's select this bottom plane here. Now if I draw out a box and then click, it is going to automatically start extruding or thickening this box. Now if I pull this up, there are a few different functions that we could do. So we are creating a new body automatically at this point. But suppose we had other shapes in the space. Suppose I had a circle next to the box and I extruded up and those two overlapped with each other. We could either join those shapes, we could cut them or intersect them, or create a new component, which is going to place the body under that component. So right now we're just creating a new body. And if I click OK and then inspect this element with a section analysis, what that's going to show me is that this cube is completely solid all the way through. So there is no open geometry. There's no empty space in here. It is just a completely solid cube. And that works well when you export the file for 3D printing, because we need a file that is completely closed on all sides and doesn't have any open geometry. So that's just kind of an overview of this workspace. We will be getting into the forms workspace in our next module of this tutorial, but for now we will hide this body. So another cool feature is that if I'm working on something and I'm a little distracted by what else is on the plane, I can click this little eyeball icon up here, and that will hide the body that's there. So it won't take it away. You can still see it's down here in the timeline, but and we can turn that back on and go and edit it at another time once we start finishing our other component if we need to. Now, in order to create really specific and complex shapes, we can start with a sketch. And so if I come up here to this sketch icon, if I click on this, it's going to ask me once again to select a plane. And for the purpose of this model, I'm going to select the this plane right here. I can start by creating a circle, and that is going to pull out and give me the center diameter in this little window here. Now, before I click anything, as I'm just kind of moving my mouse around, I'm not holding anything down, I can enter some dimensions. So I'm going to make this 21 millimeters. And then I hit my enter key, and now you can see that this is what Fusion 360 refers to as a sketch body, which means that it is a closed shape, and I can see if I move my mouse over it, it treats it as a body, so it turns blue, and that means that it's a closed shape. So now we are going to create a second circle and extrude that from the center, and we want to make this ring thick enough that when it 3D prints, it's not going to get all kind of messy and mushed on top of itself. So I'm going to make this 3 millimeters wider than the interior diameter. So we are going to make this 24 millimeters. And now, as you can see, if I scroll over, this blue area appears between those two because they are overlapping bodies. But I can treat this area, this ring, as its own body. So now we've completed a sketch. We're going to finish this sketch, and that's going to take me back into the parametric workspace. Okay, so now if I click on this blue area, that is my ring around everything, I am going to select that and be careful not to select the edges. I'm going to select the interior space here, and then I can either hit this icon up here called extrude or push E on my keyboard, the letter E. And once I can do that, I can grab this little arrow and just pull upward, and that will extrude that shape into a body. Now I can also enter my dimensions over here, and I am going to enter the dimensions of 20 millimeters. And once I'm happy with the extrusion and I've created this new body, I can click OK. And now I have a cylinder, and what this is actually giving me is 1.5 millimeters of thickness all the way around. Okay, so now I have a cylinder that I'm happy with the height. And my next step is going to be to achieve the general shape of this, this curve right here on the ring. So that it's not a consistent cylinder all the way around. So there's a way to do that with this sketch again. And so what we can do is go back and create a new sketch. And I'm going to actually pick the side plane here instead of the front. Let's see, this is the front. And what we want to do is come over to the left. So we can click that on our cube up here and be sure that that is on the correct facing face. So once I have my plane selected, my tools appear up here. So I'm going to create this fit point spline, which is going to allow me to create a curved line. And if you ever run into any mistakes, like let's say I create something that I don't want this to be up here, I would rather it be down there, I'm going to hit Control Z on my keyboard, and that undoes, that's the undo key for Fusion 360. So I'm going to make sure that this line comes just below the top front edge of the ring. And then I'm going to drag that shape up and over to completely encase the ring. Now these points are things that I can grab and edit later. So I'm going to finish this sketch, and then I am going to grab these points and move them where I want them. So I would like for this to be a little bit more curved there. And what we are going to do now is extrude this shape in a cut function. So we're going to hit E on our keyboards again, and we're going to select this blue area of the sketch. And instead of pulling this from one direction, we can click this drop-down menu and select for it to extrude on both sides. Then we can come down here, and instead of our operation creating a new body, we can make a cut. And so if I go and pull this in this direction and this direction, now what I've done is I've cut that top shape. So I'm going to click OK. And instead of creating a new body, what I've done is edit my shape of my ring. So now that I've created my general ring shape, what I want to do is add a decorative design feature, and this is often done by creating elements of negative space, as it's called in kind of the art world, which is just basically shapes of empty space. So I'm going to click on my front profile of my ring so that it's nice and centered, and then I'm going to go up and create a new sketch, and I'm going to select the forward facing plane here. So now anything that I create is going to be on that kind of center forward facing plane. And I'm going to start by just creating fit point splines once again. So I'm going to use this, and basically the way that this works is you create points, and then as you move, those points kind of create curved lines, and once you circle back to your original point, it kind of snaps together, and then you click that and you have a complete shape. So I'm just going to do that a few times, and I'm not being too careful about this. I'm not worrying about symmetry or you know, making these super perfect. I'm just kind of creating organic shapes that are visually interesting to me. And one thing that I am being conscious of is the amount of space that I'm leaving between the shapes, because I'm thinking about how these layers are going to be built up. And even though we have support material, we want a healthy amount of connection between all of these shapes while we're 3D printing. So I'm not going to get too close to the bottom edge or to any of the edges of the other shape. Okay, and if you need to move any of these points around, you can do so. You can hit the escape key. That will take you out of your tool selection here, and you can actually grab these little bars and sort of move them in different directions. And depending on which one you select on and how it works, they can be a little bit jumpy, but you can see that you can go and move your points, and you can edit these shapes as you need to. So I'm happy with this, so I'm going to go ahead and finish my sketch. And now if I rotate my view, I can see that my sketch is kind of right in the middle of my ring. Now I want to select all of these sketch bodies, but if I go and click, right, I'm clicking on the body of my ring, and that's not what I want. So what I can do is I can hide my ring body, and then I can click and drag across all of these sketch bodies, and now they are all selected. Now I can go and add my visibility of my ring again, and we can see that our sketch bodies are still selected. So we're going to hit E for extrude, and we are going to make a cut instead of a new body. Once I make that cut, my directional arrow appears here, and I can pull this out through the ring, and it's going to cut out all those shapes in my ring. So I'm going to click OK, and that looks pretty neat. So I am happy with that. Now, if I'm not happy with the way that that looks, I can actually come down to my timeline where my sketch body is in the timeline, and I can right click and hit edit sketch. And that will take me back into the workspace so that I can go ahead and move these points around again. So we don't need to do any of that, but once I finish that sketch, right, and I show my body again, we still have this point selected. If I were to make any of those changes, those would reflect in my final cut shape because it would restore that timeline. Okay, so now what we want to do is create a bezel where we can add a gemstone to the front of our ring. And before we do that, it's always wise when you're working on a different part for your model is to create a new component that you can house those bodies and sketches under. So I'm going to go up to my top profile here in the left side and right click and create a new component. This is going to be kind of like a container for my new part that's going with my ring. So I'm going to call that a bezel. And if you're making multiple bezels, you can label them, bezel 1 or bezel 5 millimeter, bezel 4 millimeter, or whatever whatever would be easier for you to reference later. And so we're going to activate that, and we're going to uncheck this activate box, and then we're going to click OK. And now we have a new label under here that's under our main, under our main filing system. And if we activate this, if we click on this little key here to activate, this will allow us to create new sketches and new bodies that are housed under this as kind of like a little file folder. So that's just going to make it easier to navigate later when we're selecting things. So I'm going to create another sketch to make my bezel, and I'm going to make sure that I am front facing this ring, and I'm going to select that face that is facing toward me. Now I can make a circle in the dimension that is going to work for my gemstone that I have in mind. And what I can do is, since I've centered this whole ring on the center point, I can also look at this green line and kind of figure out a rough placement for the center of this bezel. I don't need to be perfect with this because I can move it around later, but if I come to this green line, you can see it kind of snaps to that. And if I click on that and pull it out, what I want to do is enter the widest dimension of the exterior of my bezel. So what I'm going to do, since I'm interested in putting a 7 millimeter rhinestone in there, I'm going to enter 8.1 millimeters. And that extra tenth of a millimeter is just to account for any kind of shrinking in the PLA or any kind of just giving us a little bit of room to play when we are inserting our gemstone. So we're going to finish the sketch, and since this is a little busy right now, I'm just going to turn off the visibility of my body by clicking on this little eyeball icon. Now I'm going to come and select my sketch body, and I'm going to hit E for extrude again. Now if I turn this way, if I enter a positive dimension, say 3 millimeters, you can see that it's extruding backward. That doesn't really matter too much for our purposes, but if that happens to you and you don't want that, you can enter minus before your dimensions, and it will extrude the other way. So I'm going to hit enter because we're creating a new body, and this is what we want, is a nice cylinder here. So now we have our cylinder and it's all closed up, but we want an opening for our rhinestone. So what we're going to do is go up to Modify and create a shell. And once we create a shell, we're going to have to select our face. And as you can see, when I'm pulling on this, I can make an opening that basically has a floor inside of that container. So I'm going to go with 1/2 millimeter for this because that will reduce my total interior diameter by 1 full millimeter. It's going to be 1/2 millimeter thick on each side, which makes my interior dimension 1 millimeter shorter, and that will fit a 7 millimeter rhinestone in here. So if that doesn't set at 0.5 millimeters when you're pulling it, you can enter that in here and then just click enter. So now we have a bezel, and what we want to do is turn our sketch body back on. You can see because our bezel is the active body, our other bodies are showing up as a wireframe, and that's okay. So what we want to do now is move our bezel to the appropriate location. And in order to do that, let's say we don't have our bezel selected. If I go and I try to click on that, or let's say I click on it from here, it only selects this exterior face instead of the entire body. So in order to make sure that I select everything that I need to, I can come over here to the left-hand menu to under my bezel part and drop down the bodies tab. And then once I right click on that, I can select move or copy. So now, as you can see, we have these arrows that come up. You can move the bezel in different directions, and watch as I move this. You can see the depending on the direction that I'm moving, it's giving me the number of millimeters that that it's moving forward or backward. And I can enter those dimensions if I have a specific distance that I want this to move. I can come over here and enter those. I can also rotate by clicking on any of these rotating tools, up and down, left to right. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that because we don't want to rotate it. We've already oriented it in the way that we want. But what I'm going to do is grab this little arrow and just pull this forward. And what I'm looking for is a healthy amount of contact between these two bodies, my ring and my bezel, without the ring protruding through the bottom of the bezel too much. If it does a little bit, that's not a big deal, but I want my edges to make a good amount of contact with the ring, and I want there to be enough room inside the bezel and enough surface area for me to be able to glue my rhinestone in there. So this is at a distance of -11 millimeters. I'm going to try -11.5. See what that looks like. Now you can see that we don't have contact between these two edges, so that might be a little too far. I'm going to reduce that to 11.25. And you know, that looks pretty good to me. I don't think we're going to run into too many issues with getting our bezel in there. There's a good amount of surface contact between the two parts, and that should 3D print very nicely. Now, if this is too low or too high, I can move this up or down. I'm actually going to move this up a little bit. I'm looking at this from the front. So that is in a good placement. And we are looking at this ring from the front, even though it's a wireframe and you can see the back there. That's okay. Okay, so we're going to click OK. As a couple of final steps, what I would like to do is create just a little kind of spacer in the back of this ring just for flexibility. And the way that I can do that, once again, creating a sketch, and I want to look down from the top plane. I'm going to I'm going to select that top plane, and then I'm going to create a rectangle here. And I can kind of go off of the graph for my rectangle. I can make this a little wider if I want to, but I think this size looks pretty good. Finish that sketch, and then I'm going to select that sketch body. We're going to do another cut with our extrude function. We're going to pull this up and change that to a cut. And now we have our spacer here. We don't want this really sharp edge here. So what I would like to do is create a fillet. This is a very helpful function for lots of applications, especially when you are trying to create something that isn't so sharp. So I'm going to go up to fillet, and what I can do is I can hold my shift key down and select both of these edges. So you can see up here in this tab, it is selecting both of these edges. And once I start pulling on this, you can see it creates a curve on that edge. So it's not going to be as sharp as it was on originally just from cutting. And we'll just click OK on that. Our two components are overlapping, and once we export that as an STL file, that will all come out as one part or one body. So I'm going to go up to my Save button here, and I'm going to click Finish. I'm going to type Finished Ring Demo. That's going to save that version as that title. You can also check milestones. If you have different milestones that you want to reach and label, you can go back through those milestones at different points. So I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to export this as an STL file. And I have to click the type as a drop-down menu, click STL, and then I can choose my file location. So make sure that you choose a location that you know where it's going to go, and then click Export. Now that is going to give me a status, and once that progress is complete, I'll be able to click on this tab, as I did this earlier. I'll be able to click on this tab and show that in my File Explorer. So if I double click on this on a computer that already has Ultimaker Cura installed on it, it will automatically open that file in Ultimaker Cura, which is our slicing software for the Ultimaker 3D printers that we have inside the MakerSpace. So now you can see that my 3D model has appeared in the workspace, and it is ready to 3D print. And so you will need to follow the steps in the manual for printing with support, and this type of support that we recommend for this type of print would be PVA natural, which dissolves in water and won't damage any of these small components while you're trying to remove the support material, but that will allow you to 3D print this with a bezel and then add your decorative element later. I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial and that you are able to make your ring. Please keep an eye out for future workshops in the MakerSpace, and have a great day.